Hello and welcome back to the SimTech podcast, the show where we dive into the world of clinical simulation, innovation, and the people behind the tech that bring training to life. In today's episode, we're heading inside the Lifecast workshop, the home of some of the most realistic mannequins in healthcare simulation. We're joined by Dave and Steve from the Lifecast team, who are taking us behind the scenes to share their thoughts on something that's more than often overlooked but is vitally important: colour. From the subtle presentation of things like cyanosis on different skin tones and the realism of both well and unwell babies, Dave and Steve talk about why representation and accuracy in skin colour matter, not just for realism, but for better, more inclusive training experiences. So sit back and enjoy.
So good morning, I'm Dave, I'm one of the founders of Lifecast. I'm here in Steve Shackleton's workshop to talk a little bit about colour, specifically colour in mannequins. So we started our journey at Lifecast about 7 years ago, and I suppose when we started, most of the mannequins that we saw when we went to trade shows were Caucasian, or they were white people. And it was a big frustration for both us and for our customer base that actually there weren't more ethnically diverse mannequins around. And so we spent the first couple of years really trying to represent people from different cultures and colours, and actually look at diversity in all of its forms. And that included skin tone, ethnic background. It also includes in the adults sexuality, disability, so many other areas really that weren't being thought about very well in the world of simulation. And so what you can see in front of us at the moment is one of our Afro-Caribbean babies, and you can see that he's representative of somebody with a slightly darker skin tone. And what we initially saw in the first couple of years was that people were not very good at teaching how cyanosis, as an example, occurs in people of colour. So we started off by looking at specifics around just generalised colour. Then we moved on to, well, how does colour actually change when somebody is well or unwell? And that's really led myself and Steve down a rabbit hole of looking at, different types of colour and different expectations, I suppose, of how people appear when they're healthy or unhealthy. And what you can see in front of you at the moment, this baby here is he's got a little bit of mottling going on. So he's representative of a 28-week-old premature baby. You can see that he's got the little stubby cord, so he was born some hours ago. He's got a little bit of downy hair, and he triggers emotion, but actually he's a quite nice mottled ALS mannequin. And mottling was one of the first skin tones that we started to produce for people. As time's gone on, we've taken that a little bit further, and I'm going to pass over to Steve to talk to you about baby V and the jaundice baby, to try and explain how the journey went in a slightly different direction. So I'll pass over to Steve now.
Thanks, Dave. So now we're looking at baby V, as it's become known, and the conversation around why it's called baby V is one of interest in its own right. But it just made talking about this mannequin over the phone easier in a public space, rather than referring to it as the deceased mannequin or the deceased baby. So baby V, and V being the phonetic alphabet Victor, so we've got that opportunity to call it by name if needs be. But baby V was handed to me, I guess, as a project when I first got involved with Lifecast sometime back in September, October. And had been requested seemingly by some neonatal teams looking at managing training for palliative care and the discussions around palliative care and end-of-life care in the neonate population. So when we were thinking about what to create, it was my utmost priority really was to try not to create something that's so ghoulish, for want of a better description, that it was offensive. And that's quite a challenge, because obviously we're dealing with quite an emotive subject when it comes to the death of a child. And so baby V is a 28-week prem baby, but just with the depiction of being deceased. And we thought as a teaching tool that enables teams to create simulations that are more about mental rehearsal, psychological rehearsal of having those discussions around the emotion, around the difficult conversations to do with child death in a safe environment, rather than the first time they meet a baby that looks like this being in their own areas of clinical practice. It also allows, beyond the scope of a sort of resuscitation mannequin, which it fully is, you can still do a full resuscitation here, but it also starts that conversation between multidisciplinary teams, and the idea that somebody makes the decision to perhaps terminate resuscitation that's been started in the first instance, and how those conversations go, both with junior clinical teams, but also then with parents who may be witnessing that. Interestingly, we sort of tried to depict really the capability of the Lifecast team as much as anything else. So whilst the front of this mannequin is very clearly sort of ashen and mottled, and the baby looks very, very unwell, it's really when you turn the baby over that you start to see the signs of some hours having passed since death, in terms of the lividity and the pooling of blood. If we just go back to that, you can see one of the things that they've tried to illustrate really is that the contact points in terms of the hard surface where the blood has been unable to pool, compared to the areas around it where it's gravity dependent pooling in the soft tissue. And again, if you think about the different scenarios that can be used in, particularly in a pre-hospital setting, you can imagine the scenario that could be created to help prepare those pre-hospital teams for the event of meeting a baby like this in their practice. The one that we've just moved on to here, then, moving away from baby V, is again another example of what can be done with colour, and it's referred to really at the moment as, it's a prototype, so referred to as the jaundice baby. And anybody that's sort of had anything to do with children with jaundice knows that this is a pretty extreme example of jaundice, about as yellow as you're likely to see. Having said that, it is a mannequin that's designed to represent jaundice, so you're always caught between the do we make it so subtle it's barely perceivable, or do we make it that it's clearly a jaundice mannequin? Because ultimately the conversation and the curriculum requirements for the management, treatment and identification, I guess, of jaundice need to be met by the use of this as a tool. And when you look at jaundice as a topic, pretty much every paediatric department in the country will have a jaundice clinic for managing and reviewing babies who are jaundiced in the first hours, days and weeks of their lives. And dependent on the timeline, depends on the significance and perhaps the underlying cause of the jaundice. We know that jaundice at the sort of 3 to 5 days is considered to be not necessarily normal, but certainly expected, and less of a concern than if this baby was born like this and was this colour on delivery. And those two things would definitely require some difference in investigation and potentially in treatment as well. So what we've done here with this one is actually give an interchangeable cord. So if you were running a simulation, of course this is a full ALS mannequin as always, so you can still do your in situ simulation type training with this baby, irrespective of the colour, but you could also change the cord, so you could have here, as we've got here, a very fresh new cord, as if this baby has just been born, or you can swap that out for one which is a little bit more shriveled, dried, and represents 3 or 4 5 days down the timeline, to give that inference of where you're meeting the baby and when the jaundice has manifested. So it gives simulation teams options in terms of tailoring that scenario accordingly. But again, it's just another great illustration of what we can do with colour to illustrate, clinical pathology.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Steve. The journey with colour will continue with the team at Lifecast, and we'll be looking at how we can make greater representation using colour from both health status, but also race, background, and all of those other areas. So thanks for taking time to have this conversation with us about the use of colour in simulation. Thank you.